Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. If you are just joining us, if you're new here on this episode, then you're right in the middle of a fascinating two-part discussion all about music and the link between music and languages, whether musicians make for better language learners. I left you on a cliffhanger on the last episode, so we're going to get straight back into the discussion here. Now, at the end of the last episode, I posed a problem to Fia, which is this. When you're learning a piece of classical music, you're learning fixed notes. You know exactly what the notes are going to be, and you're preparing something very organized and controlled. But when you come to speak a foreign language, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the conversation is going to be. You don't know what words you're going to have to use. So surely this is the point where the parallels between language learning and music start to break down. Here's what he said.
In that case, I think speaking languages is a lot more like jazz. I think that's something you're more qualified to talk about than I am, because I just play whatever's on the page and I add my emotions to it.
It is a huge difference, isn't it? Like, classical music and jazz are very, very different. They really are. So for those people who maybe aren't so familiar with it, there are various different kinds of jazz, right? And just as there is classical music with jazz or improvised elements as a part of it, there's a broad spectrum. But in general, when we talk about jazz, we're talking about perhaps a tune or a melody that is performed, which tends to be quite brief. But then you have a much longer, more extensive improvised section where you take the harmonic progression of the piece that the tune that you've just played, and then you improvise on it, and that goes round and round and round, and you just play and you make stuff up. And the kind of the focus, the feature of the jazz performance is that improvisation, and most jazz musicians are assessed or graded on their ability to improvise. So you think, well, who is the greatest jazz musician in the world? If you're asking that question in the 90s or the 2000s, you might say the name Keith Jarrett would come up a lot, because he is generally regarded, perhaps not anymore, but for a long time, as the world's best improviser. Not the world's best learner of pieces or learner of tunes to perform, but the world's best person at taking a chord and improvising. So with jazz, we are practicing the fundamentals. We're learning how to improvise melodically, rhythmically, harmonically over a particular chord sequence. We're learning the rules, if you like, and when to break them, which is just as important in jazz. But then when we actually come to perform, all bets are off. It's up to you, right? It's like you have to you improvise, you make it up, but that making it up is informed by the rules and the things that you know how to do. So in that respect, it's very related to language learning and very related to speaking. So in terms of practice, like when I practice jazz, I'm not doing what you're doing with that Villa-Lobos piece. Because with that Villa-Lobos piece, you're practicing the same notes over and over again and learning to perform them in the most exquisite way. With the jazz, it's not like that. The practice is learning how the best way through the chord sequence in a particular piece. So how to improvise over that chord sequence in such a way that you manage tension and release, you resolve harmonic changes in the right way, all while creating a nice melody through the improvisation. And I guess maybe that's what I mean when I say I get used to my memory and experience of performance of jazz helps me with speaking languages, because I see a lot of parallels there. You never know exactly what's going to happen. When you're playing jazz, you're dependent on the bassist and the drummer, just as if in a conversation you're dependent on the person you're speaking to. But still, there is an element in the jazz of repetition. You're learning a 16-bar chord sequence or a 32-bar progression. It's very different from learning an entire language and how to deploy it and use it. I guess with the language, I don't know. I've got all these gut feelings and these hunches, but it's very difficult to say exactly. But I think the one thing is that I always spend a lot of time practicing functional language when I'm speaking, you know. So ways to introduce ideas, ways to react to what someone said. You could call them like milestone parts of a conversation, things that have to happen. And so I guess that's very similar to the jazz practice. I don't know. I don't want to overdraw the parallel here, if you know what I mean. But I think there is a huge amount of stuff to compare, if only in the respect that you have to be comfortable with the uncertainty of not knowing exactly what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, no, I think the thing is, this is probably one of the first times that I can think of that people are actually discussing this from two musical backgrounds. So there's a lot of things we can attack. So I totally understand. We're thinking out loud as well right now.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, there's one thing we haven't touched on in this conversation, which is the role of accent and pronunciation. Because, as I said before, this is what most people this is their kind of go-to thing when they talk about, well, what's the link between music and languages. Most people think, oh, you have a good pronunciation or good accent in your languages because you're a musician. People say to me all the time, well, I guess you're able to produce the tones in Cantonese or Thai because you've got a good ear.
Right.
I don't know, because I don't know what it's like not to be a musician. So it's kind of difficult for me to know. I think it's fair to say that, like, I do have a good ear, and that comes from the music for sure. And I tend to feel like, in general, my pronunciation and my accents, my production of languages is pretty good, and I'm sure there is a connection. But maybe you could talk about that for a minute in your experience.
Yeah. So I think I was approached by a lady that was trying to become a teacher in my high school. She just came up to me. She said, "Are you a musician?" I said, "Yeah. Why?" "Because your French is so good." I said, and that was when I realized there was a connection. It never fazed me. So when we talk about our ears and being able to hear, what that means is we can hear the difference between, for instance, a T. A T in different languages is not the same thing. There's a D, there's a D, there's a D, there's a ts, and these are all T's written as T's. And the job that we have as language learners is to be able to hear the difference. And so, when we make fun of Americans for speaking other languages, which I think is the worst accent ever, yo quiero comer, it's very,
Stop, please.
Always shaking his head now. But the reason is, it's not because they suck, but
it's not just simply Americans, by the way. English sounds pretty much exactly the same.
Yeah, I think it's the English in general. The language just gives us all these sounds. And so if we take yo quiero comer, the problem is we're not able to hear that the sounds are shorter. Yo quiero comer. And it's the rhythms are different. For instance, if I take Indonesian, if I was going to say, "Halo, nama saya Fiel." So I just introduced myself. My name is Fiel. "Halo, nama saya." It's very it's very short. Everything's very staccato and it's very sharp. Now, English is not like that. We're very round. We're very just kind of wavy. So that's the main thing, is being able to hear the different A's in each language, and that each language has a different mouth set. Just like a classical guitar is not a flamenco guitar, is not a jazz guitar, I think. Yeah.
When I think about the areas of listening and pronunciation that I think might be helped by the musical background, that the example that you gave is one of the areas that I don't immediately think of, actually, because I've noticed that one kind of pet peeve of mine in language learning, one thing that I often fail to understand, is the difference, for example, between short and long vowels. So I have this in Cantonese sometimes, where you have, you have a big difference between saying leng and leng in Cantonese. But if I'm just listening, I often won't hear that, because especially when people speak quickly, that difference between the short and long vowel reduces to the point where it's almost indistinguishable. So that's something that I struggle with quite a lot. And there's other. I mean, just to keep taking the Cantonese example, because that's what I'm working on at the moment, there are lots of slightly different consonant sounds which don't really exist in English. And you have a kind of different spectrum of consonant sounds, which are quite hard. I find it a little bit difficult to hear those. So I don't know the extent to which like having a musical ear helps you across all ranges of pronunciation. But the thing that the area which I do feel fairly confident in is that of the sentence level stuff, like sentential things, such as intonation or sentence stress or things like that. So I feel very attuned to the melody of a language, like in the kind of the typical Brazilian Portuguese song-like intonation, or the sort of tight constrained Spanish, very limited range of pitch, or the kind of slow, cautious, methodical, panther-like Japanese way of expressing ideas in a sentence, or the kind of Cantonese tones which just take you melodically all over the spectrum. Like, I feel like I pick up on those really quickly, and just the same way as if you like when you introduce yourself, like I just said then, like when you introduce yourself, you've got a very clear contour to that sentence. Introduce yourself. You've got not only a rising falling pattern, introduce yourself, but you've also got a stressed word there, which is introduce, and then it's one of the syllables within that word, juice. Introduce yourself. Like that. Anyone who's looking to improve their English pronunciation is going to listen to that phrase. Introduce yourself and try to get that right. I feel like I'm pretty good at picking up on the shape and the form of those kind of sentences in other languages. So I kind of feel like it's for me it's on more of a macro scale than a micro scale. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. When you were talking about introduce yourself, other examples, English does this a lot, and I can only think of 2 examples, but one word can have 2 meanings depending on the stress of it. Here's your present. Do you want to present, or here's my address in American English, and then so today he's going to give an address. It's totally different things.
You sure? Word stress. Yeah. Desert, dessert.
Yeah, word stress. Right. Yeah.
And that's something that that you find is, I mean, different languages are different, right? Because English is a stress timed language, right? So you need to get that stress right in order to get to speak properly. Whereas something like Spanish is a syllable timed language. You don't have that kind of you don't have that same necessity. But still, you've got. I mean, I guess every language has those words where you have that word stress and you need to get it right. So that's something that comes naturally to you, or you struggle with, or what?
Yeah, I think in the beginning everyone struggles with it, but I've also found that after having learned a few languages, you get better at it because you can compare it to your native language. But I've also been surrounded by the Indonesian community. In Indonesia we have 300 different ethnic groups and 700 different languages. So there are people from all over all the time. And my dad, he speaks a few other languages, and he's picked up on those, and he'll speak in those to those people from there. So I could hear different accents. And so I was born in Portland, Oregon, and then I moved to New York when I was 10. And hearing people talk like this, it was like, oh my God, that's disgusting. But do I want to have this accent? No. So I chose not to. But it's there. And so it's just hearing that compared to your real accent, you kind of have a dictionary of sounds in your head that you can pull out at a different time.
I wonder if people who grow up with multiple languages have a kind of training that's similar to that of a musician. So someone who grows up speaking, say, English and Chinese bilingually, or like someone who, typical situation here in the UK, say a child has a Polish mother, a Spanish father, and goes to an English-speaking school. So they grow up with exposure to 3 languages. I wonder whether that sensitivity gives you the kind of that exposure gives you the kind of sensitivity that you get from studying music, I guess it must be fairly similar because you just have to get used to distinguishing things, right? I guess another way of approaching that question would be, what is it exactly about the musical training that gives you this sensitivity in your ear to pick up on different things? What is it exactly? Is it the what element of your musical background do you think gives you that sensitivity?
So I actually would say my musical background doesn't give enough because the guitar, if for those of you that are watching the video, it has frets, right? And each fret makes sure that the note stays in tune. Now, if you play a violin, one of the other stringed instruments, violin, viola, or cello, you have to be able to know exactly where to place your finger on your instrument. If not, it'll be out of tune. And so it's that forced, quote unquote, desire to sound good, but also to know what is actually right that causes us to strive for it. Because our teachers are also on our case, and there's a whole bunch of people looking around as well. Side note is that it's interesting, but people specifically from Asian countries like Korea and China, mainly China, tend to have perfect pitch across the board. For those of you that don't know, perfect pitch is when you're able to just hear a note or even a sound and tell someone what the note is.
Is that
A,
true
B,
that
C, D.
they tend to have perfect pitch? Really?
But they also have much more musical training from an earlier age over there.
But
At least that's what I've noticed in conservatory.
But what's the perfect pitch attributed to? Is it the
some say it's the
tonal
tones. Yeah, some do say it's the tones, but I would also back it up with a lot of ear training from when they're young. That we in the States just simply do not have. You kind of learn all this music theory and solfege once you get to conservatoire.
But not. Oh,
yeah.
Really? Okay, that's a big difference because in Europe, I mean, the ear training is pushed right from the beginning in lots of kind of mainstream music teaching.
Right. I mean, also, I think the other thing is we don't really go to our local conservatory or a conservatoire. Most people go to a local teacher. Sometimes you have music schools around, but usually a lot of it is very YouTube based now. And it tends to be the ones that can afford it that go straight to the music schools.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, listen. Well, we could go on for weeks. I'm sure.
Yeah.
But one thing I want to touch on, before we finish, is the implication of all of this, because what do we have to say to somebody who has no musical, someone listening to this or watching this now, who has no musical background and is learning their first foreign language?
Mm-hmm.
Because I could understand how someone in that position might be feeling. Well, I don't have a hope. I have no music. I have no language background. What am I supposed to do?
Right.
So I've got my own thoughts about that. But what's your reaction to that problem?
I think it's easy to forget why we do something in the first place. And especially if you go to a language event, whether it be Langfest, the gathering, or the conference, you meet all these people with all these badges and, they got all these languages on there with these stickers and you get intimidated as well. But the whole point is to communicate with people. The reason you learn a language is to love out loud through conversation. And what I mean by that is just listening to people, getting to understand people from different points of view. Maybe in the States, you just cannot stand Trump supporters. Take the time to talk to them, or maybe you just kind of have a prejudice towards Hispanics because you just hear all this stuff on the news. Go to one of their restaurants, and talk with them. Say, hey, how did you get here? Let me understand a bit more of your culture. I think that for me is the main point, is to enjoy people.
But are we saying that the accent? Yeah. Are we saying that your ear and the accent stuff doesn't matter? Because I think it does.
It does, but it's not most important, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess when looking back on the various years that I've spent with music and languages, I mean, all of this stuff is learned. None of us are born with this. Like, we get at it through hard work, and a lot of the, a lot of the gains, I think, you get fairly early on. So with just with a small amount of music practice or musical training, or a small amount of dedication and devotion to languages, by taking the time to learn a language, just with that, I think a lot of the gains come quickly. It's not the case that you have to do this for 20 years in order to experience these gains. I mean, it is, all of these things can be and are learnt through deliberate practice and repetition and learning and focus.
Right.
And I think the worst thing of all is for people to kind of think, well, I don't have this natural talent, or I don't have this background, therefore I cannot X.
That's a whole other podcast. Talking about talent.
It is, yeah. But I just wanted to kind of plant that there because it's kind of easy. I don't know. I'm just conscious that most people don't have the extensive musical training that we do, but I would hate for it to come across as a requirement to be a polyglot or to learn languages.
Yeah,
or
not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. Okay, well, listen. I think we'll draw that to a close then. But this has been absolutely fascinating. It's great to see. We've got a lot of similar experiences and ideas, I think, but it's really refreshing to hear these ideas spoken about from someone that's not me. So thank you for that. That's been really great. Where can people go and where can people connect with you if they want to learn more about you or look you up?
Okay, so people can find me on between3worlds.com, where I discuss loving out loud, having better conversations with people. I talk about music and languages a little bit, not too much. I focus more on just getting at the hearts of people and more humanitarian things. But also, if you guys are interested, Ollie will put this in the show notes. We talked about chunking, and we talked a bit about stage fright. So I've written an article on Shannon Kennedy's blog, Eurolinguist, and specifically on chunking and how to practice your language like a musician learns his music. And there's also a post, which is not yet posted but will be, on Lingualift's blog on stage fright and how to conquer it.
Great. We'll put a link to those in the show notes. Fantastic. And maybe I can persuade you to write something like that for my blog as well.
Sure. I'd be more than happy to. Also, I almost forgot. I did do a talk on this at the Polyglot Gathering. Ollie will also put that in the show notes. And it kind of gives a big philosophical run through. I know it's a lot of information, but the main point is to get food for thought in your minds and then just grow what sticks out to you most.
Absolutely. Phil, it's great to talk to you, man. All the best, and enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the spring and the summer and the rest of the year in New York.
Thank you so much, Ollie. It's a pleasure. Look forward to hearing from everyone.
Talk to you soon. All right, what a great conversation. I really, really enjoyed that, and I hope you got something out of it as well. If you would like to check out any of the links that we mentioned here, Fiel's blog is at between3worlds.com, 3 the number 3. He's also got a video of him at the Polyglot Gathering giving a similar talk on this topic and a bunch of other stuff as well. Everything is going to be in the show notes to this episode. You can find them at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 181. So definitely go and check that out. Also, I'd really love to have your comments if you've got any thoughts on this. Maybe you're a musician yourself and you have some thoughts on the link between music and language learning. Please go ahead and let us know there. Likewise, there is a blog post that I've written recently all about, I guess it's a more concise summary of my thoughts on the link between music and language learning. You can find that as well in the show notes. Once again, iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 181. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure having you on as always, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit, that's PODKIT, to get free access. Inside you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT, and if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.